Welcome to the On-Target HTML5 website YouTube channel. The website is dedicated to teaching web development technologies in HTML5, HTML, CSS, CSS3, PHP, MySQL, Flash, and the XML scripting language. We'll soon be adding a section on JavaScript, so I hope you visit us at www.ontargethtml5.com.
Welcome back to the HTML5 Essential Training Series. In this tutorial, we're going to talk about block level elements. So, block level elements. As we discussed in an earlier tutorial, H1 through H6 are heading tags, are block level elements. Divs, which we really haven't looked at yet, but we're going to during the exercises of this tutorial, they're also block level elements as well as paragraphs. And they're the most common block level elements that we have on our HTML web pages. Of course, with the advent of HTML5, there'll be new block level elements that are going to become very popular as the standard becomes more implemented. We're going to discuss a lot of those during these training tutorials. The section element is going to become very, very popular because it makes indexing our sites so much better. The article element, which is another big part of HTML5, will become very popular. And those are block level elements. These elements are called block level elements, and each one of them begins a new line in the HTML page when it's displayed. Block level elements take up vertical space in our browser window. When these elements are displayed by the browser, each element has a default font and a default size that's determined by the base font and styles of the browser, unless overwritten by our CSS reset. Normally, this default font is a Times New Roman 16-point font, and the padding and margins are different based on the browser manufacturers. Block level elements are the main building blocks of a website and can contain other elements. So inside of our block level elements, as you'll see in the next tutorial when we talk about inline elements, block level elements can contain other elements. Each block level element begins on a new line, and the base font size and spacing of the block level elements above and below headings and paragraphs is determined by the browser defaults settings that are part of the browser. All these values can be changed in CSS. And that'll probably be one of the near future tutorials is a CSS reset, so we can set everything back to normal regardless of the browser, so we have a standard starting point for all of our websites. In addition to headings, the H1 through H6 tags, the divs, and the paragraphs, there are some special elements in HTML that are considered block level elements also. These are used to set up special code blocks inside of our HTML pages. So let's take a look at three of the most popular ones that we'll actually go through during our tutorial series. The first one is the pre-element in HTML and HTML5. It's still available. This element is used to display pre-formatted blocks of code. This tag will be used as we develop our sample website. Any white space or line breaks that are displayed in the content of the element are also maintained when they're displayed in the browser window. Think about that for a minute. In an earlier tutorial, I told you that white space is ignored as we're developing in our text editor and as it's being displayed in the browser window. With the pre-element, it's not. We can actually get white spacing included into that browser window. So keep that in mind because it actually does come in handy as we're setting up some of the formatting for some of the things that we'll put into the browser or into the web page. In addition, the content's displayed in a monospaced font to appear like code displayed in the manual. And again, that's by default. We can change that font based on our CSS styling. The Bok Quote Element in HTML and HTML5, this element's used to display an actual quote inside of our HTML document. Depending upon the browser, this content may actually be indented from the left side of the block element that contains it, or can be indented from both the right and left side depending upon the browser defaults. The element does not add quotation marks to the text. And the address element in HTML. This element is used to display contact information in HTML for the owner or developer of the website itself. The browser will normally display this information in italics. And again, because of the way we index our site pages, these previous three elements, they're actually used quite a bit in current website design. So, although these elements are provided default formatting in our browser, based on the browser's defaults, they should not be considered as formatted that way. It's recommended that the formatting for these elements be controlled through CSS so that you can style the elements based on your web page design. And again, we're going to go through that in a tutorial in the not too distant future. We're actually going to go through some of these CSS settings. And in fact, as we're looking through our block elements, you're going to get introduced to CSS, because I'm going to use CSS to actually show you how we can easily see what space a block element's taking up on our web page. So with that, let's go into our development environment and let's look at a couple of examples of some of the things that we just talked about in this presentation. All right, so let's get back into our tutorial. I'm going to go ahead and minimize this presentation. You'll notice that we've got our WAMP servers up and running, our XAMPP server. The Apache's running, and both MySQL and PHP are also running. Go ahead and minimize that. Let's go open up our text editor that we will be using, my Sublime Text 2. You can use whatever editor you prefer. I'm going to open up my browser window. You'll notice that my browser window is on our default Chapter 7_01 document, which is our HTML5 template sheet. This is for our block level elements. This sheet will be in your exercise files if the exercise files are available to you. If not, now would be a good time for you to pause and copy down this sheet or type it into your text editor. What we're going to do during this presentation is we're going to demonstrate some of the things we talked about in the presentation by looking at some of our block level elements. The first ones we're going to look at are the heading elements. So I'm going to go ahead and add a couple of lines of code into the body of our HTML document. This is example 2 inside your exercise file. And this is just going to add 2 headings. We have an H1 heading. This is an H1 heading, and an H4 heading. This is an H4 heading. I'm going to go ahead and save that. I'm going to save this one as Chapter 7_02 inside the exercise folder, so that if you decide to follow along and you have access to the exercise folders, if you've purchased the tutorial, you can actually follow along with me and see the different steps as we go through this. I'm going to go ahead and load that into my browser window. So I'm going to go ahead and refresh my screen, load up 02, and you'll notice our 2 headings are displayed, our H1 heading and our H4 heading. Keep in mind the purpose of this tutorial is to demonstrate that these are block level elements. Now, I know they're block level elements because of the things that I've done in my development life and how many times I've used these headings, but you don't. So let me show you an easy way to determine the difference between a block level element and an inline level element. And the first thing I want you to do is I want you to notice that inside of my HTML5 website for Chapter 7, I've actually added another folder into our website. I've added this folder called CSS. And right now it's empty. There's nothing inside of it. But that's where we're going to store our style sheets as we walk through these tutorials. And you'll notice as we've built up in the tutorial series, you're getting closer and closer to how I actually build my directory structure for my websites. I've got an images folder and I've got a CSS folder so far. And as we work through these, you're going to see a lot more. But one of the things I want to do in order to demonstrate, let's go ahead and bring back our HTML5 file, or 02 file. One thing I want to do is I want to show you how I see that these are block level elements. I'm going to go ahead and add some styling to these. So I'm going to create a new file. So in your text editor, go ahead and open up a new file. I want to save this as, inside my CSS folder, I want to call this main.css. This will be our first introduction to CSS files, or cascading style sheet files. There is a section of the website that is dedicated just to CSS, because CSS is used to style everything we do on the web now. But for our demonstration, I want to show you how I can easily see that these are block level elements. So inside my main.css file, I want to add a couple of styles. The first style I want to add is an H1 style. And I'll show you how I know it's an H1 style. I'm going to go ahead and paste that in. And now would be a good time for you to stop if you need to copy that down or type that into your document. Now would be a good time to pause your presentation to type that in. And what I'm doing, let me explain at a very high level, because this is not a CSS class, but I want you to understand what I'm doing here. I'm identifying this H1 tag for styling. And the way I do that is I say, okay, H1s, any H1s that I put in my document, I want you to put a border around that H1 that's one pixel in width. It's a solid border, and I want it to be green in color. And I'm going to go ahead and save this file as my main.css. And if you look back at your Chapter 7_02 HTML, Remember, we called this style sheet from the very beginning. That line's always been there. And it's telling me, hey, look, this is a link, and it's referencing a style sheet, and that style sheet's located in the CSS directory, and it's named main.css. The rest of the information after that is version tracking that I use when I put together my style sheet, so don't worry too much about that. You're mainly concerned with this information right here. It's telling you that it's going into the CSS folder. There's my folder right there. And it's going and opening up the main.css file in order to get that styling. Okay, so I'm hoping you got that. You should have that sheet already copied. So when I refresh my window now, you're going to notice I've got a border around my H1 block level element. And you'll notice the border doesn't stop at the end of the text. The border actually proceeds all the way to the size of that browser because it is a block level element. So the border takes up the entire vertical spacing of that particular element. And that's what we mean by block level. If the bigger the browser window becomes, the more space that element takes up. So let's go ahead and close that out. All right, let's look at our H4 tag. Remember, we still had another H4 tag, and it's also a block level element. So in my style sheet, I'm going to add some styling. And again, this is all part of example 2 in your exercise files. I'm going to add some styling for the H4 tag that's inside that window. And again, I've identified the tag, how I'm styling it. This time I want a border that's 2 pixels in width. I want it to be dashed, and I want it to be red. There are a lot of different attributes that we can put on these, and as you go through the CSS portions of my tutorials, you'll see there's a lot more stuff we can do here. This is very basic. I'm just trying to show you how I'm demonstrating that these are block level and not inline level elements. So now we've added one for the H4 tag. Let's go ahead and save all our changes. Let's go ahead and refresh that browser window, and now you'll notice we've got that dashed line, 2 pixels in width, that goes around the H4 block level element. And again, just like the previous, if I extend the browser, the H4 element also extends to the width of the available browser. The spacing between these elements, the spacing between the edge of the browser window and the element, and the spacing of the text inside the element are all determined by the default settings in our browser. In a later tutorial, I'm going to show you how we can reset all of that. Okay, so let's go in and demonstrate a couple of other additional things I want to show you on block level elements, and we'll pick that up in a moment. All right, picking up where we left off, the first thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and save this, save as. So let's do a save on this file. I want to save it as chapter 703. Because again, what I want to do is I want to have these available in the exercise folder, so as we build on this tutorial, if you're following along, you can actually follow along with the steps. I'm going to go ahead and keep that main CSS as it is. What I want to demonstrate next is let's go ahead and look at a div tag. And the div tag is a tag that we haven't looked at in the previous example because we didn't talk about that earlier, but they're very, very important as we put together HTML documents. And the div it's for division. It's called a division tag, and it actually takes our web page and it allows us to break it up into divisions for styling. And it's used very, very frequently. It's not going to be used as much in HTML5 as it has been in the past because we've got some new sectioning elements in HTML5 like the section element, the article element, the navigation element, the footer element, the header element. Those are elements that weren't available in HTML4 and in previous versions of HTML, but now they are available in HTML5 to speed up and to help with our indexing of our site pages. But it's still, the div element's still going to be used quite frequently. So what I want to do is on this body, I want to stick a div element, div element, right below our body tag. I'm going to go ahead and keep my indenting correctly. Then I'm going to go ahead and close this div element. And again, it's closed just like all the elements that we've looked at in the past. We use that forwarding tag. So I'm going to close that div element. And inside of it, I want to put a p tag inside that div element. In the p tag, I'm saying this is just paragraph text. And again, you can get all this from your exercise file if those are available to you. If not, now would be a good time for you to pause to catch up with where we're at. We've added a div tag right below our body tag, and we've closed that div tag, and then we've added a paragraph tag. And p tags and div tags are also block level elements. But there's something I've done here that I want you to see. Okay, now the first thing I want to do is let's go back into our CSS file, and right below that H4 element I want you to type div, and I want you to get your open and closing curly braces, and I'm going to go ahead and put a border around the div. So I got border, then I have my colon, and I'm going to say let's have a 1 pixel border, no space. I want it to be solid and I want the color to be blue. And then I end that statement with a semicolon and I save it. Now keep in mind I've still got my version 2 file loaded here, so I'm going to have to go back and load up version 3. So let's refresh that browser window, load version 3. And what I want you to notice is I want you to notice the div, where that div block element has become. If you'll notice the way that I've indented, the div itself has now included the block elements for the heading, the paragraph, and the H1 and H4 tags. They're inside that div element. Let's make this a little easier for you to read. Let's make this a 3 pixel solid blue, so it becomes easier for you to read this block element, and you'll notice that everything else now is falling inside that div block element. So what I'm trying to demonstrate here is that you can actually have block elements inside of block elements. Probably doesn't seem important right now, but as you start styling your sheets, it will become important. Let's go ahead and add some styling for that p tag also. So you can see that the p tag also has its own styling. We're just going to make it solid. Oops. Have to make a border first. Border, 1 pixel, solid black. And we'll end that with a semicolon. Let's go ahead and save everything. And then go ahead and refresh this browser. So now you can see not only, again, block elements, we have the paragraph tag, H1 and H4 tags, and the div tags, all block elements, and they're all being displayed in our browser window. And again, as we did earlier, I can resize this, and you'll notice that the div still includes all the tags that are inside of it. If I were to move this div tag outside of here, let's go take it to the bottom of this element here, and let's just tab in so everything is in line again. I'm going to go ahead and do a save as. Let's save this as chapter 7 number 4, so we actually have a new file. We're still all using that same CSS file because our links haven't changed, but I'm just going to save this as number 4. And now I'm going to go back and load number 4. Let's refresh our browser window, load up chapter 704, and you'll notice now I've got that solid blue line, but there's nothing inside of our div, and it's no longer encapsulating the p tag, the H1, the H4. As soon as I put some text in here, if I were to put a p tag in here, then we would get, I'm just going to put in some text. Let's close that p tag out. Now that we have something inside of our div will now actually take up some space, and you'll see that we've got a paragraph tag inside that div tag. Alright, so let's go back and look at those pre-tags in the block quote that we talked about earlier. I want you to also see how they are formatted by default inside of our browsers. Alright, so real quick we're going to look at the pre-tag. It's one of the tags we discussed during our presentation. And we talked about it actually shows white space and spaces that are put into the document, and it uses a monospace font by default to display in the browser window. So I've got a chapter 7_05.html document open on our screen. Again, available in your exercise folders. Nothing in the file. We don't have anything in the body tags. Alright, nothing in the file, nothing in the body tags. So what I'm going to do, this would be a great time for you to pause the video if you need to type that in. I'm going to go ahead and grab our pre-tag text from the example file. And inside my body tags, I'm going to go ahead and paste that in. And you'll notice what I've done here is I've got our opening pre-tag, our closing pre-tag, and I've just typed in some text and just put some random space in between it. Because according to our presentation, it should display the text with that spacing in it. So I'm just going to go ahead and put some spacing in there. Actually, I'm going to add some additional spacing right in there. Let's go ahead and save that change. Now I'm going to go ahead and load that in my document window by doing a refresh. And you'll see that our pre-tag did include that white space, even though with a normal paragraph tag, and in fact I'll demonstrate that here, in normal paragraph tag, that white space would vanish. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and grab all of this. I'm going to put it in my paragraph tag, and then I'm going to close out that paragraph tag. When I save this and then refresh it in the window, you'll notice there's a big difference between how it's displayed with the pre-tag and how it's displayed with the paragraph tag. And by the way, the only reason you see the black line around there is we've still got our CSS file loaded, which gives us a solid black line around that P tag. If I want to pull that out, I can actually just take out the tag identifier, save it, refresh the browser window, and that would be gone. But that's the only reason you're seeing that black line, is because I've still got my document loaded through the CSS file. But notice how all the white space that we have inside the pre-tag has disappeared when we put it into a paragraph tag. Now I want to go ahead and pull this out. The pre-tag, just like the paragraph, the div tag, and the heading tags, is also a block level element. So what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead, let's go ahead and save all those changes, refresh my browser window. What I want to do is I want to go ahead and take some formatting for the pre-tag that I have in my example file, go back to my CSS sheet, let's go ahead and put that formatting in there, and you'll notice I'm just putting a border, 2-pixel solid green border around the pre-tag, and like the other block level elements that we demonstrated with earlier, when I save all these files and refresh my browser window, we'll see that solid green line around that pre-tag. What I want you to understand is, because of the default formatting of this particular browser in Firefox, you'll notice that it appears to be starting in the center of our screen. And a lot of that has to do with how it's positioned inside the text editor. But again, we shouldn't take the default formatting of these tags and keep that for our styling. We should actually go in and reset these, which we're going to do when we get into our talking about our CSS reset. All right, so let's go in and look at the block quote tag that we talked about in the presentation. All right, so the next example we're going to look at is the block quote. And if you remember from the presentation, the block quote is an element used to display an actual quote in HTML. The element does not include quotation marks, and depending upon how the browser's defaults are set, will depend on how it actually displays in that browser window. So let's go ahead and minimize our presentation. You'll notice I've saved our chapter 7 file underscore 6.html. Again, we're starting out with a blank canvas. So again, you'll have this file in your exercise files. I'm going to go ahead and copy my text that I want to put in here between my body tags. I'm actually going to put in a block quote and a paragraph because I want you to see the difference. So I've got a block quote tag right under our body tag, to be or not to be. That is the only question that I have. I close out my block quote tag, and then I open up a paragraph tag so you can see the differences in the formatting of those two different tags, the default formatting of those two different tags inside of our Firefox browser. And I will let you know that I have been testing these in other browsers as we've been going through these demonstrations, and they're pretty much the same in all the browsers. All the browsers, it's actually getting quite pleasant that the browsers are treating these very, very similar, almost no difference. So in Firefox, I'm going to go ahead and refresh this browser window, and you'll see that my to be or not to be is indented from the left-hand side, and my paragraph tag starts almost flush to the left, and I still, because of my main CSS, I've still got that border around my paragraph tag. But you see that there is differences in the way that the block quote is coordinated and displayed as the paragraph tag. Now what I want to do is let's go ahead, because the block quote, like I've explained earlier, is a block level element. Because it's a block quote, it's impacted by the way the block level is displayed also. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this block quote CSS. I'm going to go back into my main CSS file. I'm going to add some styling for the block quote. Now would be a great time to pause if you need to type this in. I'm going to go ahead and save that main CSS file. I'm going to go ahead and go back to our chapter 7 underscore 06 HTML file. I'm going to save everything that we've got just in case I forgot to save the changes in my HTML file. I'm going to go ahead and refresh my browser window, and you'll see now that we've got our formatting. But the block quote in this particular browser, and actually in all the browsers that I tested, is not only indented from the left-hand side, but it's also indented from the right-hand side. So there is a difference in the formatting of the block quote by default in the Firefox browser. And again, if I resize my browser window, you'll notice that that indenting stays pretty consistent across the board. So that's pretty interesting in what's going on there. But again, block quote is a block level element, so it too is treated as a block level element. There's one more that we discussed in our presentation that we need to look at, And that is going to be the next one we're going to discuss. All right, and the last block level element that we're going to look at in this particular tutorial is the address element. This element is used to display contact information in HTML format for the owner or developer of the website. I use this tag occasionally. I mean, I don't use it all the time anymore. I used to use it all the time when I was first starting out. Don't use it that much anymore because there's other ways I do that inside the footer of my documents or of my pages. But the browser will normally display this information in italics. I will let you know that all the browsers I tested it in currently are still displaying it in italics. So let's go in and demonstrate how the address element looks in our browser window. All right, I've got my chapter 7_07.html file open. Again, just my plain HTML5 template file, nothing in my body tags. I'm going to go ahead and go into my example files folder under example 7 and copy the text that I want to put into this browser window. I've added an address tag. You'll notice my opening and closing address tags, plus a paragraph tag to compare it to. The reason I'm using the paragraph tag for comparisons is because the paragraph tag is probably the most popular tag we use in HTML. It's probably used more than a lot of the other tags combined. I mean, that's pretty much no exaggeration. We use the paragraph tag probably more than anything else. The closest thing to it would probably be, up until HTML5, was the div tag. The div tag was used quite a bit in HTML4. HTML5 is kind of new, so it'll be interesting to see how much we still use that div tag. I mean, I know I used it still, even in the development of the OnTarget site. There are certain areas where I couldn't get sections or article to fit based on the definition of those block level elements, so I still use div tags. But anyway, let's go ahead and save this change. I want you to go ahead and bring it up or refresh that in your browser window. You'll notice that my address element, everything is in italics, just as it said it would be in the presentation. My paragraph element, it looks like they both line up the same. The only difference I can see is it appears that the text itself or the font is different for the address element, and it's definitely in italics. The reason we have our paragraph element still outlined in black is because that's the formatting we still have in our CSS style sheet. Let's go ahead and format our address element so you can see that that too is also a block level element. So I'm in my main.css file. I'm going to go ahead and paste in my formatting for the address element itself. I've just made it a border 2 pixels wide, solid and green. Now would be a good time for you to pause that if you need to pause to type that into your file if you don't have access to the exercise files. I'm going to go ahead and save that file, go back to my 07.html file. I'm going to do a save all to make sure everything's saved. I'm going to refresh my browser window, and you'll notice now that my green border is also around the address tag, just as it is around the paragraph tag, and it resizes. It is acting just like a block level element, like it should, because the address tag is another one of our block level elements. So we've gone through quite a bit. We've gone through 7 different examples on block level elements. We've looked at our presentation. You probably know, no exaggeration, you probably know more about block level elements than most people that are designing websites. I like using this border in CSS to demonstrate how this works. The next tutorial we're going to do some inline elements, and you're going to see the differences between inline and block level, and we're going to do some nesting of inline elements in block level elements and block level elements in block level elements, so that you can see how we start putting things together to actually make up a web page. So I hope you enjoyed it. I look forward to seeing you in the next tutorial.
I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And again, check out our website, www.ontargethtml5.com, for a complete listing of all the tutorials that are available in the development environment. I look forward to your feedback, and thank you for visiting.